Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Quaranta. I'm president of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to our webinar, Your Health an Arm's Length Away, a topic I think is really interesting, and I'm excited to hear from our panelists today. But before we do that, we couldn't do these things without sponsorships, and we're grateful to Nick Moriello and the good folks at Highmark Delaware for sponsoring today's discussion about kind of the confluence of technology and healthcare, delivery of healthcare, wellness, and having employees be more aware of their own personal circumstances and what's in it for employers. So without further discussion, before we get to the panelists, I wanted to provide Nick with a couple minutes to talk about any of these topics that he'd like to share with everybody this morning from the perspective of Highmark. So Nick,
thanks, Mike.
Morning. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. What a cool topic. I was excited when I heard about this webinar. I was happy to provide some support to make it available. And we see quite a bit of interest from our members, our customers, employers in what we can be doing differently and how we can take advantage of the wonderful technological advances that are happening out there, and just getting people more in touch and really able to experience their best possible health. And so it's such a great topic and an evolving topic. You have great speakers and panelists around the room. So without further ado, Mike, I'm going to kick it back to you. I'm anxious to listen in along with your members. Thanks for having us.
Nick, thank you again, and appreciate everything that Highmark Delaware does for the State Chamber, and appreciate your participation as a sponsor today. Our panelists this morning, as Nick mentioned, are really distinguished. We'll start with Catherine Birch, who is the director of the Health and Technology Innovation Center at Christiana Care. And we'll go to Carolyn Welsh, who's the Chief Commercial Officer at BioIntelliSense. And then we'll go to Sevyan Amit, the Global Head of Digital Health and Partnerships at AstraZeneca. And we'll wrap up with Dr. Sarah Schenk, who's the Medical Director, Virtual Medicine, Christiana Care Center for Virtual Health. So Catherine, take it away and share with us, kind of frame the topics and what's happening and what's cool out there.
Great. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Mike. I am Catherine Birch from Christiana Care, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of wearables. So I'm going to kick us off with the first slide. And because I want you to think of the concept of wearables in today's discussion a little bit differently. So we're talking about traditional wearables, absolutely, but we're also going to talk about things like embeddables and implantables, and even this concept of invisible. So we hope to open your mind to how you define wearables going forward. And so on the next slide, we're going to start off with talking about the wearables you know. So chances are when you think wearables, you're thinking of, more likely than not, the Apple Watch, the Fitbit, even the Garmin, because those are arguably the top selling devices in the market today. And those wearables are making great strides from a health and wellness perspective. They started out from a fitness and a productivity perspective, but now more and more than ever before, they are a part of your health and well-being and part of your lifestyle. And on the next slide, we have an excerpt from a recent news story. So when you look at the Fitbits and the Apple Watches of the world, Fitbit just recently gained FDA clearance for a new AFib detection feature. And the interesting thing about that is we've seen that in the Apple Watch. So I share this with you as an example that this type of functionality is spreading and consumers are beginning to expect it. And so that's why you're seeing this evolution. It's really what people expect now in their wearables and the investments that they're making in devices. And if we go to the next slide, I want to share something that's maybe a little lesser known. So in this wearable, this is Amazon's wearable, the Halo Band. And the interesting thing is Amazon's taking a slightly different approach here. So as you can see from the image, they're adding to the health and wellness monitoring, the capturing of your tone of voice. So really broadening, not just the traditional activities such as sleep that you see there in the screen, but giving you insights into your day. And the tone of voice analysis that you're seeing there is enabling you to see how you sound to other people throughout the day. So just really interesting definitions of wearables in today's market. But as we look at the next slide, I want to broaden that view of wearables, and I want you to consider contact lenses. So when you think about wearables, you're really thinking about something that you're putting on, right? And it's about taking advantage of something that you're already doing so that you don't have to do more to monitor your health and wellness and manage your own health. It's really leveraging what you are wearing everywhere. And in this case, if we look at the next slide, you're seeing again, ripped from the headlines, Johnson & Johnson just received FDA approval for their contact lenses that they are really designed as the world's first and only drug-eluting contact lens. So for allergy sufferers, think about this concept of a wearable, because this is releasing antihistamine, and it's a really interesting concept of a wearable, a whole new wearable experience. Now, on the next slide, headphones. What about headphones? So there are companies out there that are reimagining headphones for your health and well-being. And on the next slide is a great example. So this company is designing headphones for when you need a mental break and when you need to increase the noise canceling because your concentration is not where it needs to be. So really interesting concept and an example of headphones that are now arguably in the healthcare space. So operating like an EEG and reading the electrical impulses in your brain and making suggestions for you. So what we're really talking about today is this focus on the consumer and how to make life easier. It's how to help people better manage and monitor their health and well-being by tapping into their life and their lifestyle. And that includes embeddables and implantables. And if we look at the next slide, here's a great example. So it's really about removing the requirement to remember to put a device on in the morning or to keep a device charged. And the concept of wearables is really expanding before our eyes. We're seeing companies tapping into this concept and even extending that to the embeddables and implantables. And it's not a new idea. So this just happens to be a CNN headline reporting on a new company that's selling implantable payment microchips. But Sweden has been working towards a completely cashless society for many years now, and citizens are getting these payment microchips. So it's absolutely happening around us. We may not be seeing it right now in our area, but it's definitely coming. So again, just broadening the way we think about wearables. And when you look at this next slide, I think what Abbott Labs is doing is a great example. So this year was the first time ever at the Consumer Electronics Show that a healthcare company participated in the keynote. And again, that's because it is about the consumer. And in this case, Abbott was featured because they were introducing their new concept of bio-wearables. And so this newly launched product, Lingo, has sensors under the skin that are monitoring your health and wellness. So again, now that's a bio-wearable, just another example of how broad this concept of wearables has become. And finally, I want to talk to you a little bit about that word invisibles. And that may be a new concept for some, but an invisible is really just something around you. It's something that is passively monitoring your health and well-being. So not on your body, not in your body, just around you. And so the next slide will give you just some food for thought. When you think about an invisible, A smart bed is a great example of that. So many smart beds today monitor things such as your heart rate variability in addition to sleep. And when you look at that smart bed market, anticipated to grow over $4 billion by 2028. So again, this, you're seeing industry leaders in this space that are now beginning to partner with health systems. So who would have thought about that 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And when you think about that, it's not that far away from other possibilities. So when you're thinking about other types of furniture, such as your office chairs or even smart conference rooms, not that far away based on what you're seeing right now. And then the last thing on the next slide that I just want to have you think about when you think about invisibles, companies are also using voice assistants to help you take better care of yourself where you are. And so that includes things like listening for cough sounds or listening for falls. And so this concept of the invisible is, again, around you. So I want you to really take this concept beyond what you think of today, that it's not something that you have or something that you have to wear, but really the evolution that you're seeing is that it's part of you or something that's part of your surroundings. And so as you hear the speakers to follow, consider that in your minds. And with that in mind, it's my pleasure to hand off to Carolyn, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about the data that's being collected by all of these devices around you and how can you benefit from it and how can you do the analysis around it.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. With that said, I'll hand off to you.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you for sharing kind of the spectrum, right, of, kind of wearable technology and the evolution. And this is really rapid evolution. What we're going to be sharing with you today is really talking about this whole shift from consumer grade wearables into kind of medical grade wearables and how that can really help transform the way that care is delivered and making it much more reliable and efficient and bringing automation around that care delivery. So we'll start with this next slide that really kind of helps. I know many of you that are on today's call are really focused on the employer segment, and you've been impacted greatly throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic wave with this kind of crisis stage of workforce shortages and staffing. That same staffing shortage is impacting many verticals across society, healthcare being one. And wanted to really talk about what is really driving things and the adoption and use of wearable technology is really these kind of stats that are in front of you. I mean, really the US is, facing even pre-pandemic physician and nurse workforce, shortage. That's even getting, that's now mounted to, 600,000, kind of nurse shortages. It is very much a C-suite level conversation. It's a C-suite level concern because, as you know, without the workforce, you can't deliver the standard of care. And you've got major health systems across the country who are closing beds because of lack of nursing. And you've got these other big movements that are happening within the healthcare landscape. There's a great McKinsey article that we can point you to as well that really brings home this fact that $265 billion worth of healthcare services are going to be moving from what we traditionally know as the hospital, the acute care setting, or as we know as the clinic, say physician office, to the home. And that's by 2025. That is not that far off. This is not over the next 10 years, over the next 5 years. So there's this rapid shift happening. And this is really kind of creating the need for being able to bring some of that wearable technology that Catherine brought in, to be able to bring that data in so that it can be acted upon at the right time and in the right place. So on the next slide, you'll This is just highlighting that McKinsey article. I just wanted you to kind of see that, and we can make that available as part of the reference material online for the group. On the next slide, this is really kind of helps bring it home. I think this visual is really looking at, over the last century, the way that we've been capturing vital sign measurements hasn't changed. I mean, this is from the far left, 1920. There's vital sign collection happening at the patient bedside, where approximately 4 vital signs were being collected today. Speed forward to 2020. What's different about this photo? Oh, the thermometer is now digital, but still there's this manual process. There's still this manual kind of data collection. So this whole new era now, and this is what Catherine was pointing on or speaking to, is this whole notion of passive data collection. But that data collection needs to be highly accurate for those same physicians and nurses to be able to take advantage of that data to make treatment decisions, to be able to take action, to adjust a care plan. So the need for passive data collection, more data is not essential. Better data is essential to delivering better care. And that's going to be one of the big differences as there's more and more proliferation of these sensing technologies, is that there's a real separation that's going to start occurring depending upon the utility and clinical use case of that data. And we'll talk about on the next slide here is this whole notion of beyond the hospital and the clinic, a lot of the complexity of care has fallen, that burden has fallen on the shoulders of not only the patient, but often the caregiver. And the care teams are frankly left with no data. When a patient leaves the hospital or clinic, really you lose visibility. There's a blind spot. On the next slide. So this is just an example, and with BioIntelliSense, where our focus lies is really being able to bring together that passive data collection through a number of different mediums. And so we have FDA cleared 510K devices that adhere very simply to the upper left chest. So these are on-body sensors that allow for that passive data collection. Our flagship device is a BioSticker that launched back in January of 2020 when we introduced our data as a service platform. And then we introduced a portfolio now of other biosensors, the Bio Button, and even a rechargeable version to help satisfy a range of different use cases for monitoring and managing patients. And for the employer market, even to the extent of having a really friendly form factor to be able to do things like health risk assessments. When participation kind of wanes on those health risk assessments, imagine being able to wear a device, say for 14 days, and to be able to have much more contextual data around a person's health status than you would from perhaps an episodic laboratory diagnostic test or some other self-reported data. Now there's an objective measurement to be able to really assess what a person's health status, so you can best map and align the appropriate resources for that individual. On the next slide. So we'll kind of give you a little bit of an introduction to this. So one aspect is, being able to make this a very effortless user experience. So we kind of say, if you can apply a Band-Aid, you can apply the wearable. So doing the human factors and the usability testing so that it truly is a stick it on and forget it experience. And as I pointed out before, there's beyond just the user experience for the patient and for the clinician. On the next slide is really what we feel are design tenets that are really essential for making virtual care and remote patient monitoring ubiquitous. And that's the point. It cannot be for just the select few. It needs to be something that allows for the, an equitable and accessible healthcare paradigm. So being able to ensure that it has the medical grade clinical accuracy, because some of those devices that some are those are more beta, that were shown previously. Some of those haven't met the rigor and the discipline of the FDA to ensure that, the data is something that you can act on. I'm sure there may be questions among all of you is, okay, now that all this data is starting to accumulate and aggregate, how do you ensure that it has the appropriate privacy and security standards, assuring that it's being managed under the strictest of standards? And so there's a number of encryption standards, there's HIPAA standards, there's a number of compliance measures that really need to be in place to ensure that that data is being properly managed. And then to be able to have systems to be able to, make sense of that data, to apply algorithms, to apply analytics. We talk a lot about AI, in the tech world, but being able to apply that machine learning and pattern recognition allows for that data to be smarter, to be able to allow for learning and allow for more efficient care. And then to be able to have things like reimbursement in place so that those to help spur along the adoption of technologies like this, so that for those facilities and for those physicians who are going to be adopting technologies like this, that they can actually get reimbursed for performing those services and adopting the technology. What's pictured here on the top right is an actual centralized command center. This happens to be one of our customers in Renown Health in Nevada. But look at this. It looks like, a nerve center, right? And this is, a bedless scenario, right? Of having, physicians and nurses being able to look at this data all in a consolidated view, and then to be able to best allocate, care. On the next slide. We've covered a lot of this. I think, just wanted to kind of give you a view of, some of the different devices. So just notice, I mean, these are like coin size type, devices. So just think of, where you don't even really know that we're not asking you to do something, right? If you're asking somebody to do something, most people don't want to be thinking about their health every day, right? But it's also reassuring, and it's also peace of mind to know that that data is going to somebody who can look over that data to be able to provide the appropriate, level of surveillance to ensure that I'm staying healthy, right? And staying along my care pathway. And next slide. So, and this is the other benefit of wearables, is to be able to start now accumulating these really what is kind of called multi-parameter views of data. So not only to bring together vital signs, but be able to even perform analytics on those vital signs so that if there's a statistical change over somebody's personal baseline, that can trigger the appropriate alert or notification to somebody who can help take better care of you. But also providing really unique insights around things like what your body position is, what your gait looks like, the symmetry of your step, the cadence of your step, the strength of your step, even the degree of incline when you're sleeping. Why would some of these things matter? Well, they could be leading indicators of whether somebody's condition might be worsening or whether they might be headed for trouble, right? So being able to earlier identify, earlier detect some of these adverse trends can have a profound impact on, patient care, on even wellness programs. You think about your employees, think about your retirees who may have chronic conditions, who may have complex care needs. Now to be able to have all of this data to be able to, like I said, provide the right level of care, but also map all these great programs that you've invested in, all these different resources and assets and tools. Now that you have a much more prescriptive and precise understanding of what that person, how their what their condition is every day and how they're progressing. Next slide. And this is, this is more of a technology view, but just to show how you can bring all of this together to make it really easy to deploy. I think some of the things that are hard as employers or provider organizations or payers is, how do we get started and how do we do this in a way that is scalable so that there's a lot of other technologies that are coming out. How do we future-proof these decisions? So having technology platforms that are what are called interoperable, meaning that it allows for data to be exchanged within the platform easily through a modern architecture, to be able to have, clinical and medical grade, tools, to be able to have platforms that really understand, that connectivity and managing that data, in a very private and secure way. So there's certain things to be looking for as you're, starting to look at, how do I start plugging some of this into either existing platforms that you've invested in, or start looking for new platforms that can help extend care. And I think that maybe, and this is just the last part is that, and this is just kind of bringing this home, is that continuous health monitoring, that's one component, the passive collection. But then, as we talked before, being able to start providing, much more precision and much more personalized care. It's very exciting. This whole area of clinical intelligence is going to get even more robust over time as the data sets get richer and richer. So it's a very exciting time, obviously, for biointelligence, but it's also a very exciting time, as Catherine pointed out, for this whole wearable category that's moving, that will have always this consumer set of devices, and that will have a growing set of medical grade devices to suit a wide array of clinical use cases and applications. So I think I should, and there's some additional data. We'll make this available to all of you to talk through some of the different monitoring, codes that are available, that once again, open up new revenue streams for facilities and physicians to be able to do this for Medicare beneficiaries today, which may be part of your retiree population that that you're also providing services for. And that's now I'd like to just make an introduction to Savion Amit, who's the Global Head of Digital Health and Partnership at AstraZeneca.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Mike and the Chamber, for inviting me here. AstraZeneca is obviously a large employer within the Delaware area, but today I'm not going to talk about this topic as an employer, but rather as AstraZeneca is a member of the pharmaceutical industry. And the things that I'll mention here are relevant for us in AstraZeneca, but many of them are relevant and for the rest of the pharma industry. So, and also when we think in pharma about wearables, we think about it more holistically from a bigger digital health perspective. And some of the things that I will mention today are not only relevant for wearables, but for digital health as a whole. So typically when we think about wearables and digital health, we think about it from two different perspectives that are the core of the company. From the research and development perspective, which is how we bring our products, our drugs to the market. And then from a commercial perspective, which is after we have brought a product to the market, how do we continue to make sure that our stakeholders are making the most benefit out of such products. So from an R&D perspective, wearables play a big role in two key areas. One is the ability to collect data, a lot more data, and sometimes real time and continuously, which is a lot more than your typical clinical trial where you have touch points, whereas the patients goes in to the clinical center and takes blood tests or submits any type of data to the investigators. The other that became very clear and very critical during the pandemic is the ability to do it remotely and not making the participant come into the clinic at all, which became a big problem and delayed a lot of the clinical trials, which led to the delay in the launching of new products from the industry. So tremendous value there for the research and development people. From the commercial perspective, we tend to think about it in three different areas along the path of the journey of our patients. So, and I'll touch on all of them and try to give a little bit of an example of what it means for us at AstraZeneca. So the first one is patient identification and activation, including diagnostics. That means, how do we find more patients or more people that actually are suffering from some kind of a disease, identify the disease, activate the patients to take action of speaking with their physicians and helping within this process of taking somebody from suffering from something, an undiagnosed person, to a patient that could benefit from an intervention. Some of the previous panelists mentioned voice and cough type of use cases for coming from wearables or from your phone. And for us, that we are very active in the respiratory area, this plays a significant value in the identification and in the diagnosis of COPD patients, which sometimes goes many years or in time undiagnosed. So now we have the technologies and algorithms. So by listening to you, either to your speak or to your cough, being able to diagnose with certain type of diseases. There is another use case related to cough from a COVID perspective, in which some technologies are able to distinguish a COVID cough from other types of cough and bringing people faster into the diagnosis, whether it's treatment or some kind of a quarantine and isolation, without the need to go and into a clinic, into a pharmacy, and take a test. So that was the first one. The second is care optimization and treatment intensification. Many times a patient has been diagnosed with a condition, but it takes a long time for them to find the right medication that would truly benefit them. And when they find the right medication, it also often takes a very long time for the intensification of such medication to the appropriate level that truly benefits. And we in AstraZeneca see a big problem and challenge, especially in the intensification from your regular type of medication into your biologic. Still, there is hesitancy in prescribing biologics. It is done by specialists. Sometimes there is no good access to such specialists. The lines and the time to see them is very long. And if by any means we could shorten the time to optimize the treatment for patients, that is beneficial for everybody. And what you have with wearables and other devices that are within your reach is not only their ability to passively collect information, it is also the ability to quickly take input from the patients. We call it in the industry lingo, patient-reported outcomes, and that is something that if on a daily basis patients submit their condition, their symptoms, how they are feeling, if they're feeling well or not, and that in turn gets communicated to their care team, that could lead to better care optimization. The last thing is achieving better outcomes and keeping patients controlled. For most of the chronic conditions, we see compliance, meaning patients actually taking their medications at low levels, and often at 40 or 50% of taking their daily medication. I think we have all needed to take our medications and know how easy it is to forget or not want to take the medication as prescribed. And if wearables and sensors could help with achieving better outcomes, that has clear benefit for the patient themselves and for us as an industry, where our products, when taken as prescribed, are truly bringing the value that we intended and developed them to bring. Underlying both the R&D goals and the commercial goals also sit our desire to get as much data, as much relevant data as possible, so that we could better understand our patients, better develop products, better improve our products and our treatments, and again, bring value through this usage of data to the entire ecosystem. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Schenk.
Great, thank you. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with everybody today virtually. Thank you so much for including me. And one of the benefits of going last is that all of the smart things have already been said. And so really, I just want to say I concur with all my panelists and wanted to just add a little bit of a clinical perspective. What does this mean to physicians and clinical care teams? And, you know, as a physician, I sort of approach this as I do any sort of solution in medicine, whether it's a medicine or any therapy. And it's really about weighing the risks and the benefits. So what good does this do for our patients, and what are the risks? So I think if we start with how do these wearables help us? And really, when I speak of wearables, I'm also including a broader definition to include remote patient monitoring devices patients use at home, including even blood pressure cuffs and scales and things like that. So how does it help us clinically? And I think one of the main things that it allows for us as a clinical team, it allows us to understand how patients are dealing with their condition, and that would include wellness too, in their native environment. So for so long, medicine has been transactional and everything happens in a visit, in an encounter, in an office. And so if you take something like high blood pressure, a patient would come into the office, we would check their blood pressure, and that only tells us what their blood pressure is at that moment in time. And it's very difficult to make any meaningful clinical decisions based on one data point. So the trend is much more helpful, and blood pressure varies throughout the day. And so it's really important to understand what that looks like in a patient. And so bringing that kind of monitoring home or out of the four walls of the office is really, really critical. And so that I think is the main benefit of things like this, is we're really able to measure patients over the continuum, over time, in their native environment, and then use that information to inform, you know, really savvy medical decisions. And the second thing I would say is that it really helps patients self-manage. It helps patients really own their condition and take accountability for it. And so, one simple example is a Fitbit. I'm a primary care physician, and often as part of a wellness plan, I encourage my patients just to get out and be active and to walk and to measure their steps. And 10,000 a day is the ultimate goal. And when patients can actually track that at home and monitor that, they tend to be more successful. Another one for diabetics is continuous glucose monitoring. So now technology allows diabetics to really check their sugars at any time, and be able to monitor their sugars and then adjust their medications accordingly. And we see now diabetics who have much better sugar control. And then there's some fancier ones, right? So there are a couple of conditions that are made worse when patients lie on their back at night. Sleep apnea, for example, is one of those things, or acid reflux, all worse when patients on their back. So now there's a device they can wear, and it not only senses the position they are in sleeping, but it actually can buzz, it can vibrate, causing the patient to wake up just enough to turn over on their side. So, it can actually start to change behaviors. And lastly, I would say, and we've known this for years, that for weight loss, right, for patients who are trying to lose weight, they are more successful when they monitor their weight at home and when they check their weight every morning. They're more successful in weight loss. So it's this idea of not only the doctor and the clinical team checking in on the patient, but really it's the patient self-managing at home using these devices and technology. Super important. So those would be the major benefits in my mind clinically. And then there are some risks, some downsides, or at least considerations. And I counted 5 of them, 5 main categories. And because I have a terrible memory, I have an acronym, which is how I got through medical school. And it's ABCDE. So the A is the accuracy, and you've heard my fellow panelists talk about that. That's always something we think about when we're getting data from patients. Is it accurate? So as a physician, I like to test out a lot of these wearables myself before prescribing them or using them with patients. And I have definitely seen some devices that are less accurate than others, whether it's blood pressure or, I have nail polish. I don't know if you can appreciate that. And that can interfere with some of these devices, particularly when we look at pulse or measuring oxygenation in the blood. Some of the devices can't read through the nail polish, for example. And so I actually just last week was testing a device, and it suggested that my oxygen levels were essentially fatal. And I knew that not to be the case, but accuracy is definitely something we need to be thinking about with all of these devices. The B is for Big Brother. So patients have a concern about privacy. So now we're sort of watching them all the time. And Christiana Care has a really unique and privileged relationship with Apple, where we can, for our patients who own Apple devices, Apple Watches, we can actually link that with their medical record. We would only do this with the permission of the patient. And when the patient does elect to participate in this program, they actually get to select what pieces of information they want us to see as their clinical team. Many of them choose not to share their weight, go figure, but pulse and steps, things like that, they're generally happy to share with us, and then that populates right into their chart and helps us when we are caring for them. The C is cost. That one is self-explanatory. We just need to be thinking about how expensive these devices are, and not just the devices, but the data that they create and the management of that data all have an actual cost to them. And I think it's important to note that the matching of the device or the digital solution with the patient or the clinical condition is really important. Some of these devices are quite, advanced, and we really don't need such an advanced, expensive solution for a lower risk condition. So if somebody has high blood pressure, for example, we probably don't need to be checking, their blood pressure and their oxygenation level and their mean blood pressure 10 times a day. Like, that's sort of an overkill. So it's about matching the right solution with the right patient and condition. The D is data overload. more is sometimes just more. And so it's a lot of information. Everything we're collecting then would come back to the clinical team, and we need to sift through it. There is alarm fatigue. And who is responsible for that data and when? What happens if somebody decides to check their blood pressure at 3 in the morning and it is low? Who is responsible for that blood pressure and when? Or is this a 24/7? What does this look like? Who's managing all this data? How do we scale it? How do we take care of more and more patients with more and more data? And then finally, the E is for equity. Super important to us at Christiana Care. We do believe that the future of healthcare is digital, and that everything that can be done virtually will be done virtually. And we need to be sure that everybody has access to that digital care, right? So same with these devices, who has access, and do they not only have access, but do our patients understand how to use these? Do they have digital health literacy? And that's something we're learning a lot about, not only through the pandemic, but we've been really studying this by sort of polling our patients in a variety of areas throughout the state to really understand their readiness for this sort of technology, their willingness to engage and to participate, their ability, and their access. So those are all really, really important. So that is the ABCDE, the risks of the wearables and the remote patient monitoring. That is all I have. I'm hoping now to turn it back to Nick, and maybe we could open it up for some questions.
Nope, I got it. This is Mike. Dr. Schenk, thank you. Great. Really appreciate all of the comments that everybody made. Fascinating stuff. Wow. All right. So I'll ask all the panelists, probably, well, yeah, just be prepared to come off mute and come on camera as I kind of throw these around, and the questions will be open to anybody to comment on. But Carolyn, I'm going to call on you because I think several of you talked about this. Dr. Schenk talked about it right here at the end too. Mm-hmm. How do we, not every device is the same. And yeah, what's the standards organization? And we're going to have to go through this quickly because we've got about 10 minutes to mm-hmm. cover a couple of questions. So who's going to certify that a device has the precision necessary to be reliable so that somebody like Dr. Schenk feels comfortable saying, hey, use this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what you've seen kind of is the Fitbit and Apple Watches and others that, even though they're starting to maybe measure things that are a little bit more medical, but it's more directional data. And it doesn't really have that precision. Really, the chasm that needs to be crossed in order for that data to be acted upon by, a physician and clinical team for some of these more advanced measurements is really to have those go through an FDA process, right? That is really the kind of governing, body for being able for that to kind of move from a consumer device to a medical device classification. And then in terms of this whole fitness kind of area and health, there are new standards being created by the Consumer Technology Association, things like, standards for what is a step and how is a step measured for different devices. So there are some different professional organizations as well as the FDA that are going to play a vital role, not only in the making it a medical device, but is even a whole classification around the data. So all of this, they have another category that's called software as a medical device. So it's beyond just this, it's that clinical intelligence that I was sharing that actually has a pathway through the FDA as well to ensure that if you're making a diagnostic interpretation or translation of that data for somebody to act upon, a clinician to act upon, that too meets that accuracy bar.
Appreciate that. Anybody any of the other panelists want to comment on this? Dr. Schenk, I guess I might call on you. Like you might be someone that prescribes this, or says, hey, this is a great technology for you. And I think your point at the end there was really great. Scale the right kind of technology for the right condition. But are you comfortable with kind of the direction and what was just shared about, the precision and the data? Any comments from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have so much to learn in this space. And I personally think that using these devices personally has been helpful for me as a prescriber and as a physician. We actually have at Christiana Care a hospital at home program. So we are taking patients who come into the hospital in the emergency department. And for many of the patients, they're offered a chance to go home and have their hospitalization at home. So these are fairly sick patients, acutely ill, and they need to have the most accurate monitoring because they're hospitalized patients. And so we use all this remote patient monitoring for them 24/7. And before we did that, we all tested out all of this ourselves, and I was a practice patient. So that's my approach as a physician. I wouldn't prescribe something to a patient that I wouldn't want myself. And so I think there's a lot of learning we have left to do. I also think that, again, when you look at steps, how important is it that the step is, a few off? Like that, that probably doesn't matter too much. But when it comes to like a rhythm strip on an EKG, that matters. That needs to be really precise. So again, it depends on what we're measuring and what our tolerance is for the accuracy and the validity of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Sevion, let me come to you for a minute. It was mentioned earlier how one company had thought about using an antihistamine relative to contact lenses, et cetera. Anything else that's kind of in development, or other kinds of interesting confluence of tech and delivery of pharmaceuticals that you might want to mention? I also thought your comments were really helpful about measuring different coughs, and also how the absence of data really kind of didn't help clinical trials move along fast enough. Any of those topics you want to comment on as we get closer to the end here?
Yeah, I'll just continue on the example that you gave with the contact lens. I think that there is now a lot of research going on with respect to the things that you could diagnose through looking into the eye, whether it's fundus scans or any type of deeper looking into the eye, whether it's chronic kidney disease or cardiovascular disease. And the technology and the algorithms are just continuing to develop and to be validated. Right now, unfortunately, you still need some sophisticated instrumentation to do it. And the hope of everybody is that we can bring it closer to the patient, closer to the site of service, with maybe the holy grail of you being able to do it on your phone.
That's great. Thank you.
But we're not there yet.
Yeah. Neat. So I've got a question here from one of our audience members. And Catherine, I'm going to go to you on this one. Catherine, the question is, how do you see the healthcare providers providing some of these devices? How about some being covered 100% as preventative care? And that actually kind of leads to another question that I had, and that is, I'm 62. Boy, I'd like to, be more intentional. And what are things that are, I can go get? What are things as an employer? What are things that I can provide to my employees? It used to be way back in the day, you might get a beeper, you might get a phone. But what if I'm outfitting people with some of this stuff? Helps them. By extension, it helps me and manage our costs, keeps the workforce healthy. What are some of your reactions to questions like those?
Well, I'm going to partner with Dr. Schenk on this question because so for me, my son is a member of Dr. Schenk's virtual practice. So he got a great welcome kit, and that is a blood pressure cup. So the box came and he's got his thermos for drinking water, the blood pressure kit, and some other things in that welcome package that the whole family now uses. So definitely that's a trend that you're seeing, is providing the basics. And Dr. Schenk had mentioned it, that it's not everything for everyone. You know, it's really customized to that visit and that person, but you're seeing more and more of those things. Those welcome kits come that are encouraging you, that are making it easy for you to do these things at home. And especially for any kind of virtual offerings, that's a key element to the visit itself. So then when you have your visit, it's okay, before we begin, can you take your blood pressure? So it's really incorporated. So it's providing it to you at home. And then the best thing is then when it gets incorporated naturally as part of that visit. So hopefully you're doing it in between visits, but bare minimum, you're learning. And I think that was part of the question. I think Mary had posted a question in the chat about that, the education of it. And so that you're really seeing this trend that is embedded with your providers. So your physicians like Dr. Schenk are making it part of the visit and doing some of that education. You know, here's how, and if it's not Dr. Schenk, then it's the medical assistant or the person that's helping you set up that visit. So you're definitely seeing those offerings more. We're becoming, for Christiana Care, more of a geek squad ourselves in helping you to explain to you. And in the Innovation Center at Christiana Care, that's part of our mission. You know, we are looking at emerging devices that consumers have. So not only the medical grade, but the consumer, so that we can empower our workforce to know what they are, to understand them. And that's not just our clinicians. We might have an administrative team that brings devices into a staff meeting. Hey, look at this device. Did you know this new? Did you see the new Fitbit? We really encourage that across our employee population.
Very good. That's terrific. Thank you. Because as an employer, I mean, I'm always on the lookout for what strategies I can deploy to keep people healthy. Really important, because I'd like them to be good contributors at work. And if you're not feeling well, you're not going to be a good contributor, or you might not be able to be at work at all. So there's a whole range of things to cover here. We're going to have to go to closing remarks here in just a moment. And Catherine, I'm going to call upon you first. If you just want to sum up, and then we'll go to Sevyan, Dr. Schenk, and Carolyn for closing comments. But before I do that, I do want to thank Nick Moriello and the good folks at Highmark, Delaware, for, again, sponsoring this. Fascinating stuff. I worked in the Congress for a couple of decades, and I did financial services. So closest I get to healthcare is when I go to my doctor, which thankfully is rare, but I find every bit of this just really, really fascinating. So I'm really grateful to all of you for contributing to this conversation, but also putting it in terms that a lot of people like me can just understand. So Catherine, closing thoughts?
Yeah, the biggest thing I will say as a takeaway is don't think of this as healthcare industry. You know, when you think as an employer, encourage your teams to share, to take that moment in the morning. Hey, I got this new wearable. I got this new watch. You know, my father encountered this situation. I think the more we share, because it is a consumer lens that we need to look at it through. What is out there? How do we make each other aware? How do we educate each other? Because a lot of times it is word of mouth. It's, hey, did you see the new update offers now this ability? So I think for all of us, share it as much as you can in huddles, in lunches, in meetings, and encourage your teams to share the latest that they're seeing, that their families are experiencing. And that's how we're going to really spread health and wellness further, with taking advantage of what's in the market now.
Appreciate that very much. Sevyan.
Let me thank you and the panelists again for a wonderful conversation here. I must say that the thing that struck me the most from the conversation today in my summary is how innovative and wonderfully patient-centered are the people and Christiana Care is, and maybe in our backyard, but myself living in the Chicago area, I was not aware of this. And kudos for them for doing all those amazing things and thinking so forward and innovatingly about all those things. So thanks again for everybody and the panelists.
Appreciate that. Dr. Schenk.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all my co-panelists. This was really, really fun for me. And I would just say in closing is that, these wearables represent important tools in the toolbox, and our toolbox just got bigger, which is always exciting for us in healthcare. But they are tools, and I think the most really exciting thing is what they represent, which is the end of the patient pilgrimage. It's the end of patients having to come find us in the four walls of a hospital or a doctor's office to get their care, because care can happen every day right where you are, at work, at home. And these tools in our toolbox help us to deliver that care. But really, it's home is the new venue of care. And that's what this represents, at least for me.
That's great. I appreciate that. Carolyn, before we ask you for the last comment, I want to, Carrie, I want to go ahead and put up our upcoming events screen here. We've got a couple things coming up. Our networking breakfast is next Thursday, or not next Thursday, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's in July, but it'll be at Insight Corporation. And we're also having a webinar just like this on universal broadband, conquering the digital divide, somewhat related to our conversation today. We got to get everybody connected. And that'll be July 19th. So without any further ado, Carolyn, last comments from you, and then we'll wrap up. So thank you for participating.
Well, thank you so much. And this has been a terrific event. It looks like you've got some exciting ones ahead. And I just wanted to thank fellow panelists and the Commerce team here for allowing us to participate. But I do think this is an incredibly exciting time, for technology to really be embraced and to be able to facilitate this care anytime, anywhere. And then, have this ability now to kind of wrap this all in intelligence, to be able to apply the intelligence so that it's even more, it creates even greater value and utility. And it can kind of create that ubiquitous remote care and virtual care vision that, many of us, share on today's call. So thank you very much.
Great, and thank you. So let me thank all the panelists, and again, thank Nick Moriello from Highmark, Delaware for sponsoring this. Really terrific conversations and points, and wow, I learned a lot. It makes me excited and very hopeful, and many both as an individual, as a management leader here at the State Chamber of Commerce. Lots of really rich and good information that I think employers from every industry and every business of every size and every corner of the state will find very, very interesting. So appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to participate with us. Thank you, everybody, and have a terrific day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.